Okay, thank you, councillors. Thank you, staff. Thank you for the members of the public who have joined us. Thank you for anyone joining in online. We will declare this agenda briefing open, and thank you, Graham. Graham, thanks, mate. We're just kicking off the meeting, so I'll just ask that's all right. All good, mate? It's okay. It's okay. Thank you, Graham. We're starting the meeting now. But welcome. Thank you for coming along. Good to see you again. Hope all was going well. So the agenda briefing tonight, for those who are not aware, is a chance to ask questions about the agenda and to get any information before our decisions next week. No decisions will be made tonight. So we'll jump straight into the agenda for this evening. So before I do, we do have apologies. We do have apologies from Councillor Steck and Councillor Brown. Councillor Gassif has an apology as well. Are there any declaration of interest for tonight's meeting? I haven't received any. Thank you. We'll jump into the meeting itself now. Dealing with the item, there's a number of the audit and policy decisions here, so we'll cruise through these ones rather than going through the chairs for an update because all their decisions are coming through here anyway. So item 10.1.1, the compliance audit return. Any questions on this? Thank you. And then into those policies, item 10.1.2, the review of the council policy. A number of these are recommended for no change, but happy to take any questions on these. Any questions, councillors? Thank you. 10.1.3. Thank you. 10.1.4. Thank you. 10.1.5. Thank you. 10.1.6. Thank you. 10.1.7. Councillor Andrew.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just on 10.1.7 in relation to local opportunities at city events policy, by way of convenience, I believe we have been using the Perth company Dinner at Dusk to facilitate the food vans at Christmas in the City and Skyfest. Does this meet the requirements of the council policy?
CEO, I think there might have been a response prepared for, but CEO, I'll ask you to respond to that one.
I don't have a response, but I might pass over to the Director, Mr Russell, to answer that question.
Through you, Mr Mayor, so advice was sought after the policy meeting last week, and to confirm, yes, that's correct, that we do use one agency from Perth and the other one is a Southwest-based company. So in answer to your question, no, we wouldn't have been compliant using the policy to its effect.
Any further questions? Thank you. (10.3.1) councillors, is the schedule for accounts paid for January. Any questions on that? Councillor Andrew.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I did raise this kind of briefly. I noticed that there has been about collectively $45,000 spent on plumbing issues. I just wonder if the CEO or the Director can give us an update on this expenditure. Thank you.
See if they can, or whether they can do, or whether they're going to take on notice.
Thank you, Mayor. I might ask the Director of Infrastructure and see if he can provide a response to that.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I probably can't give you the detail, but at the moment there's a sufficient amount of time and resources with our plumber is spent around our public toilets and with blockages and running taps, etc. So, we may visit the same facility 2 or 3 times a week, depending on its location. But there is a significant expenditure on vandalism and damage that is done to our public toilets.
Further questions? Thank you. Item 10.3.2, which is the budget review, which Council had a briefing on last week. Was there any questions on this? Councillor Andrew?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As we alluded to next door, in relation to the presentation last week from the Vocal Fusion Youth Choir, Is there an opportunity through the budget review process to find the funding I have made a suggestion that it could be taken from PR 4198, but I also believe that there is another project funding available through the CEO's discretions funds. And also what opportunity is there if we were to support the One Bunbury project, considering that we have funds for corporate gifts as well that is unallocated this year.
Sure. I think I'll probably ask the CEO to answer that in more detail, but obviously the budget review is up to this council to adopt, and what's been highlighted are some of the changes that have been recommended. So in terms of adopting any changes, obviously that's council's position. But if there are other requests that may be picked up in the normal operating budget or other positions, obviously the CEO can use that right to look at those. But those specific requests, I might just ask the CEO to answer if there's anything around that changes or requests.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the question, Councillor Andrew. The Mayor's right. The budget review currently shows a surplus of 240,000 at the end of this year, so there is clearly a capacity within this budget review to approve both requests. I think you're talking about the request from the choir and also the project that Ben Yu spoke to council about. So there is also still some funds within this year's budget outside of this budget review that we could look to fund both those if that was the appetite of council, and we could certainly prepare something for next week along those lines. So we could do it one or two ways. It can be incorporated in here, or it can be we could probably find that from within existing budgets. There is a budget for corporate gifts, and I think there is the capacity for the choir. I think is only a request of 5,000 to sponsor their partly their trip and uniforms, etc. for that. So if council was of like mind, we certainly could do something along those lines.
Councillor Andrew?
So just confirming, it can be funded without the need to go into the surplus that's currently sitting there?
Yeah, that's my understanding, Councillor Andrew.
Perhaps the CEO can have a look. I understand that request come through this morning. Councillor Andrew, you sent some questions through, and maybe the CEO can have a look at that and circulate some commentary to elected members, and maybe with that question too.
Thank you, Mayor. If you're happy, Mayor, we'll just do an advice note similar to the one we prepared for the planning matter the other week. So, yep.
Is there any other questions on that, or any other questions for the CEO? Very good. Thank you. 10.3.3 is the financial management report for the period ending January 31. Any questions on this? Thank you. 10.3.4, one of our favourite items, a rate exemption. Any questions? I just have one. No. I think my question is probably to you, CEO. I think every time one of these things come up, we normally do put a second point in there that we write to the state government and ask them to reconsider this, reconsider the effectively ruling on charity organisations requesting. So I don't know whether that's something that might be supported again. And we do it. We seem to do it every meeting, every time one of these comes up. But I'm never sure we've actually got a response. But it's probably just more note to say that we're something we're mindful of.
Was that a
Not really
question?
a question. Probably more a statement.
CEO, Mayor, just having done, because I did a whole lot of the consultation on the Local Government Act when I was consulting, and this issue was raised quite a bit about the power in the Local Government Act and the exemptions, and there was differing views. There was some that actually like those exemptions included in the Act because it takes that decision making away from council having to make that decision, but there's others clearly, yeah, and for areas like Bunbury, and I know my time in Bayswater, they have a concentration of not-for-profit organisations that tends to bite reasonably hard into the budget. So there's no reason why we couldn't continue that discussion. I think in the raft to change in the Local Government Act that hasn't been considered, but there's no reason why we couldn't continue to raise it.
Councillor Steele, you're first.
Just a question, is the whole building used for the actual Shining Hope? I've just had a look, it looks like a house, I'm just wondering, is it actually now deemed as an office, or is it a house that has?
I imagine we have to take that one on notice with some information, I'd imagine, CEO.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. We're happy to take that one on notice. Yeah.
So just the actual, the application is that all of it being used for that charity side of things.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to ask a question, is that it says they're leasing the premises, so they don't actually own it, they lease it from someone else? Does that mean the owner doesn't pay the rates either?
But generally speaking, in a commercial sense, the leasee is the one who pays the rates. They're just passed on. But CEO, I'm not sure you any got more guidance on that.
That is correct, Mayor, but again, we can answer both of those take them on notice.
And if that was the case, Deputy Mayor, I'd assume that obviously if they were to move out, this would then lose that rate exemption and fall back to the initial, I would assume, but we can get that information. And for maybe the new councillors or anyone else who's tuning in, it's a very interesting scenarios with this because council have to make the decision on rate exemptions. However, under the Act, there's no ability to not accept them. So council makes the decision, but we have no power to effectively refuse it. So a very strange scenario. Oh, we could refuse it, but fight a inwinnable battle it's at. So, yeah. Any questions on that? Thank you. 10.3.5. Any questions on this? All good? Thank you. And then, councillors, we now have a number of the motions from the annual electors meeting, starting with 10.3.6. There was a question. Councillor Hendry?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In 10.3.6, it's noted in the officer's report around cultural sensitivity. Did the city officers consult with, and I'm sorry I don't have the current title, but it was Reconciliation and Wellness Officer, I believe, in relation to this item, as the Christmas tree, which has several traditional names, including Mudja, is a culturally significant tree for many First Nations peoples, and it is believed that the spirits of the dead camp on the branches and flowers on their way to Currinup, the afterlife beyond the Western Seas.
CEO, I think that was a question, was this item consulted with the First Nations officer, is their correct title, I think, before coming to council?
I'll ask for the Director of Strategy and Org Performance to answer that.
Through the chair, this question only came through this afternoon and I haven't managed to get hold of the manager who was responsible for writing regarding the extent of the consultation. Can I get back to you on
Taken on notice,
Wednesday?
thank you,
Yep.
Director, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ramesh?
I had a look at this on Google. Has anybody had a look at the actual tree on the Google images? It looks, the description says hemiparasitic tree. That's very sacred to the Noongar community, but not very welcomed in the general because of the roots being very succulent and involved in the other plants and everything. So one of the things it says was that the cultural beliefs are strong, but the native beliefs are quite different. People find it very different as well. So I think we call it Christmas tree, the anglicized version, and then there's this Mujar, I think that's what they call that. So I just wondered, could it be sensitive, and at the same time, it's better to, as Councillor Andrew pointed out, to get some clear views and what the actual First Nations elders and others feel
Sure.
about it.
We'll get some further information on what that consultation has been, Councillor Ramesh. Deputy Mayor Smith, yep.
It was also suggested, Mr Mayor, that it was already the city's floral emblem. Can we clarify that that was the case or not? I can't ever remember it being the city's floral emblem, but that was suggested at the annual electors meeting, so perhaps we should clarify
I
that.
think there was some conversation or some wording in that in the report. CEO?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, absolutely. We'll clarify that point, Councillor.
Further questions on this one? And I'm assuming the annual electors who moved and seconded this motion, have they been informed this is coming to council? CEO?
I'll just check with the manager of governance and whether that would normally occur.
Thanks, CEO, and through you, Mr Mayor. I'd normally look at Liam, but he's been on leave for a couple of weeks, so I'll have to get back
Take
to
that
you
notice.
on that one.
Thank you.
But in short, if they haven't been, they will be prior to next week's OCM.
So this one and obviously the next couple, thank you. Any further questions on 10.3.6? Thank you. 10.3.7, I believe there was another question. Councillor Andrew, have been very busy today.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Last question on notice, I promise. Is there an opportunity for the city to also write to the local member, Mr Honourable Don Punch, Keep Australia Beautiful, WA, and the Minister for Environment, Rhys Whitby, as well? As just the last week, the ban on stage 2B of plastics came into effect in WA, and the state government's priorities on going to a plastic-free society.
Sure, I'll ask if the CEO has any problem adding to that to the recommendation, and if he doesn't, that might form part of the actual recommendation, just adding those other names in there. If anyone else has any other suggestions for that letter to go to, feel free to add them. But CEO, is there any issues with that?
Thank you, Mayor. No issues with that, and that could be moved as a third limb of that recommendation.
Cool. Happy for you just to form that part of the agenda if you think, CEO, it fits part of it. Any other questions on this particular item? Councillor Turner?
Thank you. I was just wondering if we're able to remove the rubber band and have an alternative next week. Rubber bands take 50 years to break down. And also if they're washed into the waterways, I can imagine what sort of damage they'd do as well. An alternative and maybe a paper band or something, if that's possible.
Yeah, so Councillor Turner, the elected member raised that. So the first part of the recommendation is note the elected member's motion. So we're already noting his thing, and the second part is for us to then request the CEO to write to the newspaper to look at that. So it then doesn't talk about any directives. So, and what we can probably ask of the CEO, just circulate that draft before it goes out. But the alternative that was suggested by the elector is we can't change their motion because that's what he put forward. But obviously the second part then talks about other alternatives. Councillor Ramesh.
Just the Bunbury Herald is a local paper, and then we have the West Australian, which is a statewide paper, which also gets delivered in a paper wrapped around. So if we make a decision, it will be impacting both the papers, and how are the other councils managing the paper plastic wraparound and the other councils?
So the decision for us isn't for us to do anything, it's just writing to the newspapers. So it's just starting the conversation, then the newspapers will obviously have to determine what they're going to do from that point of view. It's not us making any decision, all it's requesting the CEO to put in a request. It might enter a further conversation about what can happen in some of those questions. Councillor Ramesh. Further questions? Thank you. 10.3.8. CEO wants to make a comment?
I was just going to make the point, Mayor. So we did start to look at, behind this, but the work that we have done is we've suggested we just look at it during the budget process. There is already, through the GRV process, those properties that are closer, that front the canal automatically pay more because they would have a higher GRV than those that are further back. So there is already, through the GRV system, times the rate and the $A distinction between the property values of those that front the canal and what they pay versus those that sit further back. So I'm not sure, we'll consider this during the budget process, but there's already an inbuilt way of dealing with who contributes what based on the GRV of the property. The fact is, it does cost, I think there's nearly $1 million to dredge that every few years. So there is significant cost to the dredging of the canal.
Thank you. No further questions on that item. We'll deal with that next week, which is obviously then just passing it on to the budget discussion. 10.4.1, this was just briefly brought up last week, but a late submission for this funding round. Questions? Thank you. Oh, sorry. So, sorry, Councillor Steele.
Have the Croquet Club recently actually received CSRFF in the last few years?
CEO?
I'll ask the director to answer that.
I'm going to, no, it's Murrumbidgee, this is
From one?
different, this one's in town.
Yep. All good?
Yeah, I've answered my own question.
We're good. All good. Yep, we do have 2 croquet. Don't forget, don't forget, you're not a city unless you have 2 croquet clubs. So it's. Any further questions on that? Very good. 10.4.3. No. 10.4. 10.4.2. This agenda is out of whack because I've just skipped the next one, but we'll check on it. The Bunbury Motorcycle Club, any questions on this one? All good? Right, 10.4.3 now, that confused me why this wasn't part of the other elected meeting motions, but that's all right. Any questions on this one?
If I can.
Yeah, Councillor Turner, sure.
Oh, sorry, this is just last minute. What size of land are they looking at? It doesn't really, it just says set some land aside, but it doesn't really say what. size
Yeah,
of
well,
land.
I think it was the wider conversation there about doing it, and as you'll note, there's the city aren't supportive of that, but I'll ask the CEO, maybe through the director, if there was a further conversation or it was just a general comment from that electors meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll ask the acting director of Sustainable Communities to answer that.
Yeah, so through the Mayor, hasn't been any discussion around what size at this point. It was just actually deciding upon whether we would actually proceed and do something.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you very much. Mr Mayor, should this not go to the Heritage Committee for some sort of recommendation, why yes or no, for the simple reason that it's been raging on that committee for several years as to where Sterling actually put the pole that inaugurated Bunbury. So would it be better dealt with at the Heritage Committee?
Yeah, Deputy Mayor, you could move an alternative that this is referred to the Heritage Committee, but I'll ask the CEO if there's any other response of why officers decide on this recommendation.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually think that probably would be worthwhile, but I'll ask the acting director of Sustainable Communities to make a comment.
The officers just didn't, at the point of time writing the item, believe it necessary to go through the hack, but if that's the desire to do so, then that can obviously be done.
Can raise that next week, Councillor Smith, if you think that would be better dealt with going through that process.
Perhaps, so it could just be, if that was the desire, that we just have note the elector's motion for the setting side of the land and recommend that it be referred to the Heritage Committee.
Further questions? Thank you. I believe that brings us to a close. We'll deal with that next week. And I think there's one more. Councillor Ramesh indicated he'll be putting an application to leave in as well. So, Liam, in case I forget. What dates, Councillor Ramesh? And then Liam can just pick it up now.
Easter school holidays.
We might need the dates around that, I think. So if you send that an email, that'd be great.
About-
Thank you.
That is.
Yeah,
That's what
there
that
you
is, almost the same time. I
We're
think.
not going away together.
go. If you just put in the same
Too
dates.
expensive,
Yeah.
too expensive.
Very good, councillors. Thank you for your time. Members of the public, thank you. And staff, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the week. I'll declare this briefing closed.